Jeremy Clarkson is still fighting for a car park. Not a palace, not a stadium, a car park. And the reason that sentence sounds almost funny is exactly why this story is worth 15 minutes of your time. Because it was never really about parking. It was about power. About who controls a piece of land once it stops behaving like everyone expected it to. For years now, West Oxfordshire District Council has been circling the same patch of ground behind Diddley Squat Farm. On paper, it's a simple planning question. Does a working farm need more space for cars? In practice, it has become one of the strangest tugs of war in modern British planning, dragging in two separate councils, 3 formal applications, and a national audience that keeps growing every time the story resurfaces. Here's the basic shape of the problem. The farm draws crowds. The crowds need somewhere to put their cars. And the road running past the farm was never built to cope with that kind of traffic. That's it. That's the entire dispute in one sentence. And yet, every single time an answer looked close, it took another form, another hearing, another delay. 3 years. 3 separate applications. 1 patch of gravel. That's the kind of repetition only a bureaucracy can produce. Jeremy Clarkson, the man from Doncaster, who somehow turned himself into one of Britain's biggest television draws, found something in that farm that the council never quite understood. Diddley Squat was never just a farm. It was a magnet. And magnets change the rules around them. Once something starts pulling in that much attention, you can't regulate it the way you'd regulate an ordinary field, because it isn't behaving like an ordinary field anymore. That's the part worth sitting with for a second. This was never really a planning dispute in the traditional sense. It was a visibility machine that the council kept trying to manage using tools built for something much smaller and much quieter. And the people who should have seen that shift coming were looking in completely the wrong direction, treating a national phenomenon like a local nuisance. The problem, to be fair to the council, was not theoretical. Oxfordshire County Council itself said the additional parking mattered because it would stop cars causing disruption and safety concerns on the road right next to the farm. That's not television logic. That's straightforward road safety logic. And it's hard to argue with on its face. But here's what most people covering this story miss. The farm shop was never operating in isolation. It was already part of a much larger ecosystem. The parking kept visitors off the road. The parking kept the site actually functioning day to day. And, less obviously, the parking kept local suppliers, the small farms and producers who sell through the shop, in the game too. Take the parking away, and you don't just inconvenience a few tourists. You destabilize a whole local supply chain that had built itself around the farm's popularity. So here's the first real question worth asking. Why did something as mundane as a car park become such a prolonged fight? The answer is that Diddley Squat stopped behaving like a farm and started behaving like a destination. And destinations, by definition, need infrastructure. You cannot pull hundreds of thousands of visitors a year to a rural site and expect the same country lane that served it for decades to just absorb the load. Then there's the land itself, which makes the entire situation harder than it would be almost anywhere else in the country. Diddley Squat sits inside the Cotswolds area of outstanding natural beauty. That designation means every proposed change gets a heavier layer of scrutiny than normal. What would be a routine business decision anywhere else? We need more parking spaces. Becomes here a public battle fought through planning committees, objections, and appeals. Here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, and where the standard coverage tends to stop short. The council was never simply reacting to Jeremy Clarkson as an individual. It was reacting to the scale of the attention it had, almost accidentally, helped generate. Once the cameras arrived at Diddley Squat, the farm was never invisible again, and neither was any decision the council made about it. The restaurant dispute proved this pattern first. Clarkson tried to diversify the farm's income by opening a restaurant on site. The council shut it down. And critically, the closure didn't make the story smaller or quieter. It made the business more famous. That's the first real reversal worth understanding. In this particular situation, the failure became the product. Every refusal, every blocked plan, every enforcement notice added another chapter to a story that was already being watched by millions. The council, without intending to, helped manufacture its own antagonist role in a hit television show. The same dynamic returned with the parking application. Clarkson wasn't asking for something exotic. He asked for what was essentially a temporary solution. The site needed space for visitors, and notably, the county roads team itself backed the plan on safety grounds. Yet even with that backing, the application still had to crawl through another full round of formal process. 3 separate applications, spread across roughly 3 years, all to resolve what amounted to a patch of gravel for cars to park on. And through all of it, Clarkson kept repeating the same simple point in plain, deliberately unglamorous language. He wasn't asking to build Disneyland. He wanted order. He wanted people off the narrow lane. He wanted the farm to function without turning the road outside it into a genuine hazard for drivers and pedestrians alike. Now here's the piece that even people who follow this story closely tend not to fully connect. The council kept acting as though it were managing a small, contained rural nuisance, a minor local planning matter to be handled through the usual channels. In reality, it was co-writing one of the biggest farming stories in British television history, chapter by chapter, objection by objection. The council believed it held the leverage in this relationship.
Against the woods.
What it was actually providing, whether it wanted to or not, was the narrative engine. And that's exactly why this story keeps expanding, rather than resolving. Each objection creates another chapter. Each delay creates another headline. Each refusal makes the destination even more valuable, because scarcity and conflict are 2 of the most reliable ingredients in building public fascination with a place. The farm shop tells the same story wearing a different costume. What looked, on the surface, like a simple retail shed selling local produce became something closer to a loyalty machine. Visitors came for the place itself. Then, crucially, they came back. Not just for the produce, but for the feeling of being part of something. That's not normal retail footfall. That's a flywheel. A self-reinforcing loop where attention drives visits, visits drive loyalty, and loyalty drives more attention. The financial trajectory of Diddley Squat makes a 27-year-old farmer from Chipping Norton pulled up to his own wedding in a bright orange McLaren worth £250,000, his 5-year-old son Oscar riding shotgun. The destination, Meriscourt, a 500-acre estate a few minutes from Diddley Squat Farm, the same fields where he learned to drive a tractor as a kid. That farmer is Caleb Cooper. 3 years ago, a 27-year-old farmer from Chipping Norton pulled up to his own wedding in a bright orange McLaren worth £250,000, his 5-year-old son Oscar riding shotgun. The destination, Meriscourt, a 500-acre estate a few minutes from Diddley Squat Farm, the same fields where he learned to drive a tractor as a kid. That farmer is Caleb Cooper. 3 years ago, he was hauling veg boxes and picking up contracting jobs around Oxfordshire for rates that barely covered diesel. He was the local lad who grumbled about driving as far as Banbury. His Instagram was muddy boots and broken machinery. Nobody, least of all him, expected he'd one day be driven past Diddley Squat in a supercar with photographers waiting. This wasn't just a farm boy settling down. It was, in effect, the graduation ceremony for the most valuable unscripted character in British TV. And most people watching had no idea what they were actually looking at, why the location matters. Meriscourt sits minutes from Diddley Squat, inside the same small radius where a £45 million farm valuation, a £12.5 million land value jump, a £2 million a year farm shop, and a brewery pulling in £21.3 million a year are all playing out. Caleb was born here, learned to farm here, met his now wife Taya Wilkinson here, and became famous here. The wedding courtyard would look familiar to anyone who's watched enough of Clarkson's farm. The morning started at a local pub with his groomsmen. No hotel ballroom, no big city venue. Then came the moment that broke the internet for a day. Caleb rolling up to Diddley Squat in the McLaren, borrowed for the occasion, Oscar beside him. The same man who once said he rarely left Banbury arrived at his wedding in one of the most recognizable cars on earth, on a road Amazon turned into a global landmark. Taya wore white with a wildflower bouquet. Caleb wore a suit and his signature yellow tie. Their main wedding photo was in front of a tractor, the only shot that made sense for them. When Caleb posted it the next morning, 3 million followers saw it within hours. Not a wedding album, a broadcast. Who showed up? Jeremy Clarkson was there. So was Lisa Hogan, the Clarkson's farm cast, and Eddie Hall, the former world's strongest man, now orbiting the Diddley Squat universe. Clarkson didn't just attend. He supplied unlimited Hawkstone beer and cider for every guest. brewed on the same farm Caleb has worked for 5 years. The man who owns the farm and the brewery served drinks at the wedding of the man who helped build both. That detail matters more than it looks. 3 weeks earlier, in the closing episodes of Clarkson's Farm Season 5, Clarkson told Caleb and land agent Charlie Ireland he'd been diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer, caught early, expected to recover, but sidelined for a while. Caleb later spoke publicly about how hard that hit him, calling Clarkson his best mate. What started as a TV dynamic, bumbling celebrity, exasperated young farmer, had genuinely become a real friendship over 5 seasons. So Clarkson showing up at the reception, still recovering from surgery, wasn't a PR obligation. It was a man turning up for his friend. The relationship behind it, Caleb and Taya, have been together a decade. Childhood sweethearts from the same corner of Oxfordshire. When Caleb first appeared on the show in 2021, he already had a son, Oscar, born weeks before the series aired. Daughter Willa followed in 2023, and son Ashton last August. On the day Ashton was born, Caleb was mid-harvest and told Taya to hold on until he'd finished the row, a story Clarkson later wrote about, calling him the boy wonder. A friend had suggested naming the baby after the field he was working in when the call came, a field literally named Dead Man. They went with Ashton instead. Caleb proposed on Christmas Day 2022. 3 kids arrived before the wedding did, which finally happened in July 2026. The real story. This is a business, not a farm. Look past the car and the venue, and you find the real numbers. Caleb's production company, sitting on equity, approaching 7 figures, up from 50 pence an hour. 3 Penguin bestsellers. An Amazon content deal independent of Clarkson's farm. A contracting business that kept running even as cameras turned his workdays into episodes. A holdings company set up because he's planning to buy land. The McLaren and the venue weren't indulgence. They were a visible marker of how far the operation has scaled. The council that accidentally built the machine, West Oxfordshire District Council, spent years thinking they were regulating a farm shop, writing planning conditions, capping expansion, imposing a 16-mile sourcing radius on suppliers. What they actually did was hand the show storylines. Every restriction became a plot point. Every objection gave Amazon a reason to keep filming. Lisa Hogan has said that sourcing radius, meant to limit them, turned out to be the best thing that happened to the business, forcing them to build a hyper-local supplier network no major supermarket chain could replicate. The council thought they were closing doors. They were creating episodes. The Flywheel 3 assets now feed each other. The land, bought for around £6 million in 2008, now valued at £12.5 million. The farm shop, grown from £44,000 in initial assets to roughly £2 million in annual revenue and 25,000 visitors a year. And Hawkstone Brewery, revenue up from £7.8 million to £21.3 million in 2025, a 134% growth rate, a £75 million valuation, and a rejected $50 million buyout offer from Carlsberg. None of this is really a farm business anymore. It's a content and commerce loop that converts friction and failure into equity, episodes, and now, weddings that double as season finales. Caleb's arc sits right inside that loop. From 50p an hour to a business that owns assets and is preparing to buy land. From book deals to his own Amazon series, Caleb Down Under, sending the man who once hated leaving Oxfordshire to Australia. What's still uncertain: Clarkson's cancer recovery, a season 6 that's confirmed but conditional on his health, ongoing planning battles with the council, a harvest that still has to happen. None of this is guaranteed to have a clean ending. But the wedding answered one thing clearly. Caleb Cooper isn't a supporting character anymore. He's the person standing opposite Clarkson as the show's second lead. Proof that with cameras, capital, and the right characters, a struggling farm can be turned into a symbol of what modern farming can become. 4 years ago, Caleb Cooper was paying himself 50 pence an hour on his own farm. Today, he's boarded a plane for the first time in his life. Not for a holiday, but because Amazon Prime Video is paying him to fly to Australia and front his own 4-part series, with Jeremy Clarkson nowhere on the credits. That gap, 50p an hour to solo Amazon presenter in 4 years, is one of the strangest money stories in British farming, and almost nobody's explained how it happened. If you care about how real money moves behind farming and streaming, subscribe now, because this is the clearest example we've seen. The public version says he turned up on Clarkson's farm, made people laugh, got lucky. Like it could have happened to anyone standing in the right field when the cameras arrived. Here's what actually happened. Born in Chipping Norton in 1998, no farming family, no inherited land. He started rearing hens at 13, selling 600 eggs a week by his mid-teens, racking up £200 a month in school fines for skipping lessons to run the business. The school eventually negotiated with him. He agreed to stay for his exams and went straight back to farming the week after results day. By his mid-teens, he had a registered contracting business, doing agricultural work across Oxfordshire. Not a hobby, an operation. So when Clarkson arrived at Diddley Squat, needing someone who genuinely knew the land, Caleb was already working it. He didn't audition. He was already there. Most TV talent follows a model. The platform finds someone, builds them slowly across several series, and keeps the leverage. Because without the platform, the talent has nothing. Caleb didn't follow that model at all. Company's House shows 3 registered companies. Caleb Cooper Productions holds £9,860 equity but filed £666,000 profit in a single period. His contracting business adds £3,223. His holdings company another £46,000. Combined, £9,868.83, nearly doubled year over year, for a man on 50p an hour 4 years ago. None of that came from the show alone. 4 books since 2022. The World. According to Caleb, Britain. According to Caleb in 2023, It's a Farming Thing in 2024, and a children's title through Hachette in 2025. Every single one a Sunday Times bestseller. A publisher doesn't hand out 4 contracts to someone who's merely famous on television. They hand them out to someone whose books actually sell, one performance justifying the next. At typical hardback royalties of 10-15% on an £18 cover price, across multiple print runs of 4 titles, that's a revenue stream clearing well into 6 figures, independent of whether he ever films again. Then the tour, sold out nationwide, the final night filmed at Cheltenham's Everyman Theatre, and released as a standalone special on Prime Video. Notice the order. He built the sold-out audience first, and only then did Amazon license the special. He didn't ask permission. He proved the demand, and the platform paid to catch up. Which brings us to The Flight. 4 years alongside the most traveled man on British television, and Caleb's first ever flight is a business trip. Amazon's commission testing whether his contracting business scales to Australian agriculture, a market where single stations can dwarf entire English counties, running on equipment and logistics that barely resemble anything in Oxfordshire. He's really asking one of 3 things. Does a model that works at home work there? Can he partner with existing operators? Or does he simply bring the knowledge home to do something different? In his own words, I spend most of my time with the most traveled man in the world, so I got brave and booked my first ever flight. Australia, here I come. Funny and revealing. This isn't a travel format. It's market research Amazon is footing the bill for. Whatever he finds comes home with him either way. Amazon's own head of UK originals called it the next chapter of his journey. Not a spin-off, his journey. And that comparison is worth sitting with. Clarkson took 30 years, Top Gear, the Grand Tour, decades of columns and book deals, to turn fame into an infrastructure valuable enough to underpin a farm's business. Caleb built the equivalent in 4 years, starting at 26, from a contracting van in Oxfordshire. Amazon is now paying him twice, once as cast on the original show, again as sole presenter of his own commission. The British Farming Awards created a permanent award in his name, and he personally funds a £3,000 annual bursary at the Royal Agricultural University. Never announced, never marketed, just quietly funded for students trying to enter farming with no land and no family name, the same way he did. So here's the real question, and we want a genuine answer, not just agreement. Is Caleb Cooper the most commercially intelligent person to come out of Clarkson's farm? Not the most famous. The most intelligent about building value that survives without the show. Drop your answer below. Tell us who you think comes second. And if enough of you ask for it, that's exactly what we build next. I read every comment. See you in the next one.